You're watching San Francisco Rising with Chris Manners. Today's special guest is David Chiu.
Hi, I'm Chris Manners, and you're watching San Francisco Rising, the show that's about restarting, rebuilding, and reimagining our city. Our guest today is David Chiu, the city attorney for the city and county of San Francisco, and he's here today to talk to us about the opioid crisis, reproductive rights, and the non-citizen voting program. Mr. Chiu, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. Happy to talk about whatever you want me to talk about.
So, can we start by explaining the difference between the city attorney's office and the district attorney's office? I think it can be slightly confusing.
That is a very common confusion with members of the public. So, if you get arrested in San Francisco by the San Francisco Police Department, all criminal matters are dealt with by the San Francisco District Attorney. We handle all civil matters on behalf of the city and county of San Francisco. What that means is a number of things. We provide advice and counsel to all actors within city government, from our mayor, every member of the Board of Supervisors, to the 100 plus departments, commissions, boards that represent the city and county of San Francisco. We also defend the city against thousands of lawsuits. So if you slip and fall in front of City Hall, if there's a bus accident, if there is an incident involving the San Francisco Police Department, we defend those matters. We also bring lawsuits on behalf of the city and county of San Francisco. We're most famous for litigating and obtaining the constitutional right to marry for LGBTQ couples. We have sued gun manufacturers, payday lenders, oil companies, you name it, who are undercutting the rights of San Franciscans and the city and county of San Francisco.
So now, moving on to the opioid crisis, I understand you've had some success in court dealing with manufacturers, distributors, and pharmacies. Could you elaborate a little bit on that for us?
So the opioid industry, and by that I refer to the legal industry that prescribes pain pills, over years deceived Americans and resulted in literally thousands upon thousands of deaths and tragedies that we see on our streets every day. When it comes to the addictions that folks are experiencing, many of the addictions really stemmed from what happened over a decade-plus period where the prescription pain industry marketed prescription pills in ways that were false. We were one of thousands of jurisdictions around America that brought a lawsuit against the opioid industry, but we've had a particular set of successes that others have not. We initially brought a lawsuit a few years ago against every part of the opioid supply chain, and that included manufacturers, distributors, and retailers, including pharmacies. Over the course of 4+ years, a number of these corporate defendants settled with us. We've, as of this moment, brought in over $120 million of cash and services to the city to help address the root causes of what we're talking about. But a few months ago, we had really a historic verdict against the pharmacy Walgreens and their role. Walgreens was responsible for literally over 100 million pills flooding the streets of San Francisco over a period of years where they flouted federal law that required them to track where their pills were going to. They had what we refer to as a fill pharmacy culture, where folks would bring in their prescriptions and the pharmacist would just fill them without checking why someone was coming in multiple times, without checking why certain doctors were seeing a 100-fold increase in the number of opioid prescriptions that they were prescribing. So we had a historic judgment against Walgreens recently, but it's been a very intense lawsuit, and we know that we'll never bring back the lives that we have lost to opioid addictions, but it's critical for us that we get the resources that we need. Maybe one other thing I'll mention, because it's often a confusion, a large percentage of folks who are addicted to street-level drugs, say heroin or fentanyl, started their addictions with painkillers, opioid medications that were prescribed through doctors, provided through pharmacies. And so literally the suffering that we're seeing on our streets was caused by the opioid industry over many, many years, and has created the significant crisis that we are dealing with right now.
Right. Now, moving on, I understand after the recent Supreme Court ruling striking down Roe versus Wade that you've put together an organization that's designed to help provide free services to people who are both seeking abortions and providing them. Can you tell us about the organization?
Sure. So before the Dobbs decision came down, but after we learned about the leak from the Supreme Court about the draft that suggested the decision would be as bad as it has turned out to be, I reached out to leadership from the Bar Association of San Francisco because we knew that if that decision came down, there would be tens of thousands of patients around the country, as well as providers whose legal situation would be in jeopardy. Women, doctors, nurses who could be subjected to lawsuits, who could be arrested, who could be prosecuted, particularly in red states, 26 states where rights are being rolled back or in the process or have already been rolled back because of the Dobbs decision. So we put out a call to lawyers all over the Bay and frankly all over the country. And as of this moment, there have been over 70 law firms that have answered our call to be part of the Legal Alliance for Reproductive Rights, who have committed to reviewing cases and providing pro bono assistance to patients and providers who are at legal risk. We also are looking at potential cases that these lawyers can bring against various states in these areas that are looking to deprive women and patients and providers of their rights. It is a very dark time in America, and I'm really proud that Bay Area attorneys, the legal community here, have stepped up to answer the call.
No, that's very important. That's great. So now, the non-citizen voting program that was passed by voters just for school boards has faced some court challenges recently, but it was in place for the most recent election that we've had. How do you see that situation panning out?
Yeah, in fact, it's been in place for now 5 school board elections. So a little bit of background. In our San Francisco schools, over 1 out of 3 kids has a parent who is a non-citizen, who doesn't have a say in the election of the policymakers that dictate the future of our San Francisco public schools. And so over a number of years, there has been a movement to allow immigrant parents to vote in school board elections. A few things I'll mention about that is our country has a very long history when it comes to allowing immigrants to vote. From 1776 for 150 years till after World War I, immigrants were allowed to vote in most states in our country on the theory that we want to assimilate immigrants in American democratic values and institutions. And it wasn't until an anti-immigrant backlash in World War I that sort of ended. But in recent years, cities across America have allowed this to happen. In fact, at this moment, I believe there are over a dozen cities that have voted to allow non-citizens to vote in a number of contexts. Now, this is particularly important in our schools, just given how challenged our schools are, and given that we know that when we engage more parents in our school system, regardless of their citizenship, it helps to lift up our schools for all parents. And so in 2016, the voters of San Francisco passed a ballot measure that allowed this to happen. Unfortunately, earlier this year, there were conservative organizations that came to San Francisco to bring a lawsuit to try to overturn this. And I should also mention, it is obviously the perspective of our office and our city that this is constitutional. Nothing in the Constitution prohibits non-citizens from voting. And in fact, there's an explicit provision in the Constitution that allows chartered cities like San Francisco, when it comes to school board elections, to be able to dictate the time and manner of those elections. And so we are involved in litigation on this issue. There was an initial ruling that was not good for us that essentially said at the trial court level we shouldn't allow this. We appealed it up to the appellate level. The appellate court made an initial decision to allow this past November election to proceed as it has for the previous 4 elections. We're going to be in front of that court soon. Stay tuned. We'll see what happens.
It was good to hear that the city was able to reach a settlement with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services that meant Laguna Honda could still operate.
Yes.
How did you manage to reach that agreement?
It was not an easy conversation. Just a little bit of background. So Laguna Honda has been an incredibly important institution in San Francisco for 150 years, taking care of our most vulnerable patients, our frail, very elderly patients, many of whom are at end of life. And a few years ago, there were some issues in that hospital, some violations of rules that we very much want to make sure don't get violated. There were folks that weren't using proper PPE, who were bringing cigarette lighters into the facility, who might have brought some contraband into the facilities. We have zero tolerance for that and have made that very clear. We self-reported some of these violations to the federal authorities. And unfortunately, from our perspective, they took the very disproportionate step of ordering the closure, the permanent closure of Laguna Honda. Problematic on a number of reasons. First and foremost, there are just no skilled nursing facility beds, not just in California, but around the country. After their order came down, we literally were putting 1,000 calls a day to skilled nursing facilities around California and around the country and could find nowhere to move the 700 patients that we had in Laguna Honda. But just as disturbingly, as we were forced to start moving some of these patients, a number of them died. There's a concept in medicine known as transfer trauma, when you move someone who is that frail, and unfortunately, folks died. And we were at a point where we were 5 weeks away from the deadline for the federal government that they had provided to us to close the facility. So, and we had been trying for months to get the federal government to reconsider their action. So I was compelled to bring a lawsuit on behalf of the city and county of San Francisco, and very pleased and appreciate that we were able to come to a settlement whereby transfers will be delayed at least until next year. We're going to have at least a year of funding to keep the facility open, and hopefully we can get back up on our feet and ensure that no future violations occur, because this is an institution that has to stay open for the good of these patients.
Quite right, quite right. So finally, congratulations on winning an important public power service dispute with PG&E. Why is it important that the city's rights as a local power provider are maintained?
Well, so San Francisco has been a local power provider for decades. We are fortunate to have access through our Hetch Hetchy hydroelectric system to provide electricity to a number of providers, particularly public recipients of that. And unfortunately, PG&E has used its monopoly when it comes to private electricity to try to stop that and to block that. And from our perspective, they violated federal law in adding literally tens of millions of dollars of expenses to San Francisco and institutions that were trying to ensure public power infrastructure, put years of delays on our ability to do this. And so we had to bring a number of appeals in a federal commission. We were successful in those appeals, and there was a decision recently that basically held that PG&E could not use its monopoly to unfairly delay or add tens of millions of dollars of cost to the city and county of San Francisco as we are trying to move forward with our vision of public power. Clearly, PG&E has not been able to serve not just San Francisco, but Northern California well. We all know that with the wildfires, with its bankruptcies, with all the issues that they've had. We think there is a different model to move forward on, and we are grateful to the court in providing a ruling that allows us to move forward.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate the time you've given us here today.
I appreciate it, and thanks for your questions.
And thank you. Well, that's it for this episode. We'll be back with another one shortly. For SFGovTV, I'm Chris Manners. Thanks for watching.